GrowCFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using GrowCFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net.
Hello and welcome to the GrowCFO show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby. And today I've got with me one of our GrowCFO XLF facilitators, Rishi Sapra. Rishi, welcome to the GrowCFO show.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Great to be here.
Rishi, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. So I've lived in London my whole life, was born 5 minutes from my house, went to LSE in London University, studied philosophy and economics, and then spent the next decade of my career working for some of the big four and some of the big banks in London. So I went off to Deloitte, I was working in tax technology, then to HSBC, did product control, and then to Barclays, did some process automation and their kind of finance automation solutions team. And then KPMG, financial modeling. And then in 2017 or so, I moved into the business intelligence space. So working for BI and data consultancy, a small BI and data consultancy called Altius in the UK. And we were acquired by a company called Avanade, which is essentially the Microsoft arm of Accenture, which is where I work now.
Okay. So, Rishi, what is it that you teach on our XLF program?
So I'm going to be running a course on Power BI. And by the looks of it, I think lots of people have come across Power BI. There's lots of interest in it in the finance community, which is great to see. And I've seen that across the board. I've done some webinars on Power BI and Fabric, which is also Power BI is now part of Fabric. I've done some webinars on that for the ICAW. And we've had over 1,000 participants on those webinars, which just shows you the level of engagement and interest.
So certainly a popular topic. And
absolutely.
I used to regard myself as a Power Excel user, but I never, ever got into using Power BI. And these days, I do very little in Excel. So, Rishi, how did you get into Power BI?
Well, actually, the Power BI components were originally part of Excel for most of them. So in the 2010 or so, there was Power Pivot, which I think Dan Stockdale's covered actually in some of the accelerators and courses and webinars that he's done. So Power Pivot, Power Query, and Power View were kind of original add-ins in Excel to be able to do different types of analysis. So Power Query, being able to connect to different data sources, Power Pivot to be able to build a model, semantic model for it, and we'll come on to what that is, and Power View to visualize your data in Excel in using some weird and wonderful techniques like it has some 3D maps and things. And they were bundled into Excel. And obviously that's the place that everyone lived and breathed data. So that made sense. But it also constrained the product quite a lot in the mid 2010 and 2012, 2013 and so on. And so 2015, Microsoft took the decision to separate out those components and bring them into its own standalone product. So at this time I was working in KPMG and I saw Power BI come out and I dabbled a little bit in Power Query and Power Pivot and, really liked it. It was a nice interface to be able to work with data. I saw a lot of potential there. And I saw a lot of potential for Microsoft to really own this market space. So I thought this is something I really want to focus on and be known for. In KPMG, I did a lot of work on Power BI where I could, and then looking at other opportunities. A BI consultancy came about and they were doing a lot of this work directly with clients on a scale that made a lot more sense for what I wanted to do and focus. So I switched into more of that data and analytics role focus.
Okay. So I can see a lot of application of this on a day-to-day basis with the client to solve real problems. Why go into the classroom to teach it, Rishi?
Well, for me, it's been a hard journey learning it. The pace at which it moves with Power BI has been phenomenal, especially in the last couple of years with Fabric and Copilot. But for me, I'm also one of the community leaders for Microsoft. So Microsoft MVP, most valuable professional. I think you've had a couple of people on the show before, or at least planning to. And we're kind of people who don't work directly for Microsoft, but work very closely with their products and work with their product team. So we get access to early releases. They show us things that are coming out in the products and we give them feedback. And we evangelize their products in a broader community. And teaching is very much a part of that. So teaching for me is the best way for me to learn. It's the way I did learn. I can't sit there and learn technical topics especially, but to be honest, any real topic, just by sitting there watching videos and reading articles. I don't have the attention span for that anymore. And so the way that I really need to learn these topics is by building solutions and teaching it to others, and then learning from their questions and how they experience it as well actually teaches me a lot about the products that, I might have taken for granted or not even necessarily known. And sometimes I have to go back and look things up and iterate on the solutions that I build. So for me, teaching is a really effective way for me to keep on top of it, for me to learn. And it was the way that I learned Power BI was through the community, through building solutions for others to learn from and learning myself in the process.
So XLF is all about experiential learning. And I get that when it's a personal development topic, it's something you can take out into a workshop. You can have breakout groups about it. You can get something really interactive going on in the session. How do you do that with a technical subject such as Power BI?
I mean, to be honest, I think it's even more important in that kind of environment, because it's all good and well to be able to read documentation or to watch a video and watch someone use a tool like Excel or Power BI to perform some tasks. But actually to really learn it and for it to sink in, you need to do it yourself. You need to apply it. And so that's what the opportunity of the XLF platform provides and actually learning with others is also a great way to actually learn. Like doing it by yourself, a self-paced learning, there's a lot of value in it, but it's also can be a bit lonely. And you don't necessarily get that opportunity to get the feedback, to try things out there and learn from other people who are doing it as well. So that's the best way to learn new tools and techniques like that as well.
I agree with you, Rishi. Lots of people come out to self-paced learning with the best of intentions to do it. Some of them even get started.
Right, exactly.
But a very small number actually manage to finish. And it's nothing wrong with the video on demand, self-paced learning, read it yourself sort of product. It is something about the mindset and keeping engaged and keeping going. So I think, you're absolutely right. To do this in the live classroom in a series of workshops is a fantastic way to learn. But Rishi, Power BI, surely you've got a lot of people coming and learning about this from different experiences, different current levels of ability. How do you cope with that in the classroom setting?
Yeah, I mean, that's been one of the challenges I've always had, especially with people like in finance, for example. This huge difference in experience of Excel, let alone Power BI and SQL and things like that as well, and related technologies. And I think it's about relatability to what the baseline is for people. So with finance folk, and this is less so with the technical teams that are traditionally trained, they're not as interested in the tools, the features and the capabilities. It's more about, well, how can I use these to go home on time or to be able to reduce risk in my business or to increase revenues or reduce costs? And how can I do this to automate my processes? So it's all about bringing it back to the fundamentals of the business value and how it does rather than what it does and why that's good or not so good. So I think what in the course that I teach, the first module is nothing technical at all. The first module is actually saying, listen to this mock interview we have here between myself and a finance director, where we're talking about their current process and some of their pain points, and capture that into a scoping document template where we capture pain points, where we capture the key business questions that they want their report to answer. And what kinds of metrics or KPIs would they need to be able to answer those questions, or what would they need to slice and dice it by in order to be able to answer those questions? And that itself, as I say, it's a non-technical exercise, but it really forms the blueprint for what a technical solution needs to deliver. And it makes sure that solution then delivers on the business requirements that are needed. So really, it's not about the tools. It's not about the technology the whole time. It's actually about, what do you want to achieve? And what is this going to achieve for your business? How will it help you make data-driven decisions? And that's the key to making sure that your reports are used and have the right levels of adoption, and they deliver the right level of insight, actionable insights. That's what Power BI is all about. That's the real advantage of Power BI over something like Excel. Whilst it's great and accountants love to look at grids of numbers, it's hard to get to the actual insights of that, to really get to the storytelling as to here's what you need to do on your business. Here's what's driving your numbers. Here's the real reasons that the financial performance is better or worse than expected. And here's what you can do about it. That's what Power BI takes you to the next level to do. But in order for it to do that, you need to relate it back into, so what is it that you want to get? What's the story you want to tell? And focusing on that story makes it more accessible to a wider range of audience, regardless of technical background. The humans are very good at connecting with stories. So that's the way to bring it to life, really, I think.
So, Rishi, my experience in Power BI is actually very little. I've got very little experience in Power BI. I kind of know vaguely what it does, but my background is deeply into KPI reporting, balanced scorecards, things like that. And we typically do with a client that sort of thing that you described in the first workshop. What are the metrics that are important here? What do we need to report? Would you then go on and use Power BI these days to put an entire dashboard together? Or would you simply use it as a tool that would be able to take data and crunch it to get some of those metrics and put those into a dashboarding system?
Into a dashboarding system. So Power BI for me has three main things it could be used for. So the first of those is this idea of a semantic model. So the idea is you have your data coming in from different places. You might have your general ledger coming in from an ERP. You have some reference data, some mappings for your charts of accounts, for example, or some rules on how you need to treat certain transactions. Some of that might be held in Excel files. Some of that might be held in people's heads, for example, and then translated into Excel files. And there's all sorts of data and logic that goes into a business. Now, companies and people are expecting generative AI to be able to do a lot of this work for them. Right, to be able to produce visuals, to be able to tell the data stories that humans can today. And to a large part, that is and will be definitely possible. But the difference between Gen AI for, say, ChatGPT, Explorers, is that it's been trained on the internet. So it's very good at putting that information into context. So the difference between a Google search and something and a ChatGPT response is actually that the ChatGPT response has been trained on that data to provide the context of what you're asking and what it needs to provide. But it does
make a lot of stuff up at the same time.
It does make up a lot of stuff at the same time, and that's because of all the training data that's been given. But it also can't do that on your data because it doesn't have that context.
Right.
And that's where we as finance professionals need to be able to give that context or put that context into the data. So that's where this idea of a semantic model comes in. So it's basically different data coming in from, say, different places, bringing it together, creating relationships between those data tables and data structures. So saying this key here or this field here relates to this field here. So you can actually slice and dice this field by this. It's creating logic. So it's creating ratios. Here's your gross profit, your gross margin, your cost income ratio. Creating those kind of calculations that are able to identify the KPIs and metrics that you might want to track over time. And it's also putting in things like row-level security logic. So who can see this report? Or what data, subsets of this data can people see? All of these things are context for your data. And it's also things like descriptions and metadata, if you like. And that's all the things that Copilot can then use to contextualize your data, to understand it. So context is a key thing, I think, that you get from bringing your data into Power BI that you don't just get from here's a set of KPI calculations, here's a set of results. And that's going to be especially useful in the world of AI. The next thing is automation. So Excel has always had automation in terms of VBA or other things as well. And Power Query is a very valuable automation tool because what it will do is to bring your data in and shape it and transform it and clean it. It will record those steps like a macro, but in a much more transparent and easy to maintain way. So it's automation. So next time your data gets pulled in from the source or a new file lands in your data store, that can be automatically refreshed and all those steps automatically applied and just put into your semantic model and into your report. and dashboards. So automation in a way that doesn't build as much technical debt as you might do in other ways. And I think that's really key. So automation and context, and then storytelling, I think, is the third thing that it really brings beyond, again, just coming up with some KPIs and putting them into a tool. I think this idea of being able to have interactions with the report. So traditionally, reporting's been IT driven, standard set of reports. Here's a table with your numbers, or here's a pie chart, here's a bar chart. These are your KPIs. This is your results for this quarter or this month. Okay, great. Then it always comes back with questions. And you see this with traditional month-end board packs that go to the board. And it's like, well, okay, but what's driving that number? I want to see why. And let me dig into that. And can we do a bit of ad hoc analysis around that? And you're going back and forth to the finance team to get them to answer all these additional questions. With Power BI, because it's an interactive report, you have this ability to self-serve. So in those board meetings where you're presenting the results, you can actually go into detail and say, okay, let's double click on that number. Let's right click and drill through into detail and see the underlying journals behind this value on the income statement. Let's cross filter. Let's highlight a point on one visual and it will filter the rest of the page. So now I'm honing in on US operations and I want to see what those ratios look like for US operations or what the variance is compared to budget. And then I can hone in and drill down even further and look at it by organization unit or look at it by income statement line or something like that, where I can really start to understand what's driving that performance. So that minimizes the need to keep going back and forth to do different parts of ad hoc analysis. And it helps for those stakeholders, if they know how to use Power BI, to be able to get to those answers themselves. So I think with all of these combined together, when you've got context, when you've got automation and you've got storytelling, I think that's why you might want to think about Power BI as opposed to, okay, I've always been able to calculate some financial metrics and put them into a dashboard. I think there's a slight difference there, I think, hopefully, of what Power BI brings to the table.
And I'm minded as you're talking about that drill down function of stuff that we teach partnering bootcamp, asking the why question multiple times.
Yes. Yep, the 5 whys. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good technique for storytelling, actually. You know, you start a data visualization or report at a high level, you show your key metrics. And the idea of data visualization is actually to reduce cognitive load. That's the purpose of data visualization. It's to be able to bring insights to your users without them having to dig around and figure stuff out themselves. So you lay out all your cards on the table. You say, here's your financial performance compared to last year, compared to budget. So you immediately be able to evaluate. And again, context. This is where the context becomes in really important because there's no point just saying our revenue was $10 million last year. Okay, is that good or is that bad? Well, it depends. What did you do the year before? What was your budget number? So providing that context is really important. And that's what, again, a good practice data visualization does. It has context. You start at this high level and then you go into, well, why was my financial performance good or bad, better or worse than expected? So you then provide those breakdowns by region, by over time, or whatever other attributes you have in the slice and dice capability of. And then you can go into the next level of detail and drill down into other metrics or transactions or anything else. So that why, 5 whys, starting with the root cause, the root problem, if you like, or the root challenge in a story, right? The story has to have tension. So starting with that root tension of my financial performance is not as good as I was expecting, for example. Why was it not as good as I was expecting? Well, we sold less in London than we thought we would. Okay, why did we sell less in London? We sold less in this particular department. Okay, why? Well, we had less staff. Why did we have less staff? And so we could go into really understanding what's driving that financial performance rather than just presenting numbers and then having to go back and do several rounds of ad hoc analysis to try and figure out the reasons behind it.
So if I was to come along and attend your XLF courses, Rishi, how much what we've just been through would I be learning?
So it's a difficult subject because there's so much content there. And one of the things I have tried to make sure I do is make that accessible to a broad audience, as we were talking about, but also cover enough of it so people don't just come out of a course. And this is a problem with a lot of courses on things like Power BI. You can go on a course and you can learn how to build some visualizations or even go and learn a bit of DAX, which is the language used to build the logic in Power BI. But then when you come to try and apply it into a finance use case, it becomes really difficult because your data is not like the data you had on the course, and your requirements are more complex. And finance data has its unique characteristics, shall we say, that make it quite difficult to work with. So what I'm trying to do with the course is actually take a realistic accounting data set. That's quite simple, to be fair, and that's intentional. So we do things like combine actuals data. So it's all in monthly CSV files. We combine it in a folder. So we combine that all into a single folder. We bring in our reference data. We convert from local currency into reporting currency in Power Query. And then we produce some calculations. We produce some ratios. We look at actuals and budgets and variances. And then we tell a bit of a story around that with some data visualization. So the idea is to cover the full breadth, not go hugely deep in any one of those topics, but enough for you to be able to then go back and apply those same concepts, those same principles, and and probably to a large degree, the same formulas actually to your own data and processes, because it should be similar enough to what you want to try and do in the finance role.
Right. So tell me exactly then what it is that I'd need to sign up for inside XLF to cover these. Are we talking about one course or are we talking about multiple courses, Richie?
Well, I have split it into 2 courses. As I say, there's a lot of content. I had lots of conversations with Dan Wells about this, and I was like, let's just do it as one big course that people can commit a number of months and do this, and they'll take them on the whole journey. And he's like, that sounds great, but that might not be realistic. So how can we break this up? And so we broke it up into 2 courses. So the first course is 8 hours. So both courses are 8 hours. So the first one covers the fundamentals of Power BI analysis. So ingesting your data into Power Query, building the DAX, some logic and the semantic model, and some visualizations on top of that. And then the next course, which is also 8 hours, so run over 2 4-hour workshops, same as the first course, is they're taking that a step further and saying, well, actually, let's build an income statement in Power BI. And that's something that's actually traditionally quite difficult to do because you've got mixed formats, you've got numbers and percentages in the same column. You need to show things in a very structured way. You don't have that flexibility that you have in Excel to just go and insert a row, at least not natively in Power BI. There are add-ins for that. So in the second course, we actually look at how you work with a bit more of that kind of financial structures that we need for financial statement reporting. So we look at how to build the income statement. We look at building a bit more customization into your visuals. So to take the waterfall chart and actually build it into an interactive waterfall chart that works how I think a waterfall chart should work, which is here's your value at this period or last month or at the opening time. Here's your balance or your value at the end. And here's what explains the difference. So being able to produce visuals like that in Power BI takes a bit of work. It takes a bit more of this complexity around DAX. So the second course really takes you into that more advanced level of Power BI. And the first course builds up on those fundamentals. So that's how I've tried to structure it. So ideally, if people can take both courses, it'll be much, much better. I wouldn't necessarily recommend taking the second course if you haven't done the first, just because the data set is using the same data set and the same starting point. So the starting point for the second course is a file that we built in the first course. But obviously it's possible, and I will try and go through, if there is anyone who's joined who wasn't on the first course, I will try and go through where we got to with that.
So if I'm a complete beginner, first course going to be suitable for me?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's the first module, 4 modules. First module is requirements gathering and scoping. So understanding what you want to build and designing that rather than just putting your data into Power BI and study the build. Second module is Power Query. So it's ingesting all of your CSV files from a folder, running in Excel data. We're not connecting to any source systems in here, but the concept's the same. And then cleaning and structuring some of that data to bring it into the right data structure. So that's all Power Query. Your third module is looking at DAX. So building your data model, building your logic. And the fourth module is kind of taking that and doing some variance analysis with visualization. So enough to kind of really take you from right at the beginning and the right principles, as I say, throughout. That's what I'm really about. It's not about the features of the tool. It's about how do we make sure you have those right foundations to be able to apply this to when you go back to your desk. So yeah, hopefully. And then the second course is for people who've got some experience with Power BI and, really want to kind of take that to the next level and understand how to do things like income statement reporting in there.
Okay, right. So something for everybody there.
Hopefully. It's a hard thing to try and please all people, to be all things to all people.
An application like this, it's very hard to aim something to exactly where everybody is, but it sounds like you're taking the right approach by starting off and looking at a practical problem that you want to solve rather than the tool itself. I really like that concept. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And as I say, I think there's a lot of focus from Power BI, from Microsoft, and there's a lot of hype around Power BI and now Fabric, which is all the Azure data components brought into the same Power BI environment. And then, Copilot and Gen AI on top of that. And I think it's very easy to get lost in what does this tool do? What does Copilot do versus ChatGPT? How does this work? And what does this tool do? But actually taking that step back and saying, well, what are we trying to achieve? Are we in terms of automation, in terms of higher revenues, lower costs, lower risk, and how can we do that using a variety of tools at disposal? So Power BI is absolutely not a silver bullet, but I do think that semantic model that you build in Power BI, it can be used in Excel and it can be used in Fabric. Copilot can essentially sit on top of that. And so that kind of thing is the foundation. So taking a step back and saying, well, actually, we want to build not just a report to serve a particular purpose, but we want to make sure that we're bringing our data in, we're structuring it, we're cleaning it, and we're modeling it in a way that's going to help our business get insights using Gen AI, help our business reduce the time it takes to do that process each month, and to reduce the time it takes us to produce the narratives because we've got Gen AI to help on that. And that's where it needs that context. It needs your data to be clean. It needs your data to be well modeled. It needs your data to be well structured in order for Copilot to be able to do that. So it is about all of the end goals that you want to achieve and all of these great promises of tech, but you need to still put in the hard work to get ready for that. Just because you can do something in 5 minutes doesn't mean you should.
Right. So you're a Microsoft MVP. So you have a little bit of a look at the future. What is coming up in Power BI in the next 6-12 months? And we've seen a huge amount coming up in the last 12 months with AI and Copilot.
Absolutely.
You think the same sort of level of change is going to be coming at us in the next 12 months?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is all about AI Copilot still, I think, for the next 6 to 12 months at least. And I think a lot of what Microsoft are trying to do is, Microsoft rightfully realized that AI is only as good as the data that's fueling it. So this is where they've said, okay, we've got Power BI and that's got huge adoption across, even across finance communities and other communities as well, business communities. But then we've also got all of this technical work that's traditionally only done by IT data engineers, in Azure, who go Databricks, where they go in and they'll take data from ERP systems and they'll clean it and shape it and, to meet a set of business requirements. And that's a time-consuming process. That's a process that it might take months to gather requirements. And by that time, people have changed, the process have changed. So everyone just goes and takes that data and pulls it to Excel and does their own analysis. So, and actually that data then, that logic is sitting in spreadsheets and sitting in disparate places. And from an IT perspective, they can't manage that data across all the different areas, right? Yes, you can control the logic and security and access, for example, in the data warehouse. But once that data's left the data warehouse and it's gone into Power BI or it's gone into Excel, how do you manage the data access across all of those layers consistently? So it's been a huge challenge for a number of years for organizations, and especially some of the larger organizations have really had some of this challenge. So where Microsoft are going is to say, well, let's harmonize that. Let's bring everything into a single platform. So you don't have Azure where you do all of this data stuff and then Power BI where you do all your self-service reporting. Let's bring it all into this environment called Fabric. So all of your data coming from ERPs, coming from spreadsheets, comes into this single data lake, one lake, and you can put any tools you like on top of that. Power BI, data science, Python scripts. You can put in other tools to clean and shape and model and understand and your data and perform analytics. And Copilot can also then access that data consistently. So Copilot doesn't have to scan your entire estate for the millions of spreadsheets you have and try and figure out how they all relate and what they mean. Actually, that's context and data is all in one place, baked in. And so once Microsoft can achieve that from a data perspective, a data platform perspective, then that's going to be the source for Copilot, for Gen AI, for all of the things that the Microsoft are going to do with Power BI and autonomous agents and all of the other things I know you were talking to Adam Shilton about, I think, on the GrowCFO Summit.
Yeah. Exciting times, really exciting times. And I'm looking back at what was my biggest problem. First of all, back in my PwC days when we were putting scorecards together. Back then, it was, you knew what you wanted to measure, but you never had any data. That's turned into, oh, we know what we want to measure. We've actually got too much data and it's not very clean. So we've now got the tools to sort that out. And I also remember a period when I was working for actually London 2012 around the Olympic Games.
Oh, yeah, the Olympics, yeah.
I was the performance management manager. Now, my performance management system for the build construction of the Olympics had one target, which was to make sure there was a single version of the truth.
Right. Absolutely.
So many people were interested in information around the construction of the Olympic Park. And numbers that were sitting in my performance management system would end up on the front page of the London Evening Standard.
Right.
So you wanted to know it was the right number, and there weren't three different versions purporting to be the same as that number, but from slightly different angles.
Absolutely.
They can all be correct, but they can have had slightly different definitions of what they're trying to measure, which in turn can confuse people.
Yeah. And technology is not a silver bullet to that answer, unfortunately. That's as much as about people and process and data culture and culture as it is about data and technology. But I think it's, again, this is where we want to use the technology to make our life easier and to help with these big problems that we have. So if we can turn around and say Power BI at the moment, so the way, outside of Fabric and outside of everything else, it works in a very similar way to Excel. You open up Power BI desktop, you go and connect to a database that bring in your data and you apply your cleaning and logic on top of that. The next person who probably wants to work with the same data does exactly the same thing, goes and connects to that underlying data source and does their own cleaning and shaping and logic. And then you end up with multiple versions of the truth.
Yeah.
And so part of what Microsoft are trying to do with this is again, to harmonize that and say, well, actually, let's build Power BI on top of a single data lake.
Yes.
And let's try and bring all of our data into this data lake and put all of our logic into the different layers of this data lake. So then everything should be consistent. And let's actually stop duplication of data. Let's not have to move data from a data lake into a data warehouse, from a data warehouse into a Power BI data model, from a Power BI data model into Excel. Let's have one version of that data, one copy of that data. You can reference it, different teams and different use cases, different analytics use cases, different data products can all reference the same data, but they're not copying or duplicating the data. That's the ideal. Now, again, that by itself is not going to solve the problem because just because you have the technology, that means people don't have to copy data and can reference the same version of the truth. They need to know about how to do that. They need to have processes around it. They need to be educated on it. And this is where technology is not going to solve these big problems. It's a combination of technology, of people and process, and fundamentally education. And I think that the education is really important part of this. With the pace the technology is moving, we need to make that knowledge accessible to people outside of traditional IT functions. Yes. So to make it accessible to professionals, make it accessible to people who haven't been brought up on the internet and data and analytics and everything else that's been going on for the last decade or two. So really, that's where I think platforms like GrowCFO, where they have a really targeted audience and can help to bring really complex technical topics and everything else into the relevance for the people to meet them where they are, in the space that they are, with the knowledge that they've got, I think is really important. Really what we need as society to be able to help solve some of those problems.
And hopefully these particular modules in the XLF program that you teach, combined with all of the other things around other skills that folk in a finance function need, are going to help solve that overall problem. But Rishi, thank you for chatting with me and geeking out on Power BI and so on for the last 40
Anytime, Kevin.
Hopefully we haven't bored the audience too much, but instead excited them about what you can come and learn in the classroom. This is not a stale, boring subject. It's actually something that's quite exciting, quite animated. So come along and share the classroom experience with us. Rishi, thank you for being this week's guest on the GrowCFO.
Thanks so much, Kevin.